In the quiet coastal town of Dornmouth, life always flowed at a measured and unhurried pace. The sea washing the rocky shores was an integral part of the daily existence of the local residents. They grew up with its sound, saw how it breathed in the rhythm of tides, and learned to respect its power. However, everyone in Dornmouth knew of a place no one dared to go: the doomed depths. A deep underwater canyon, located not far from the shore, had long been considered forbidden. The elders told stories of sea monsters that supposedly lived in those waters and of ships that disappeared without a trace when they ventured too close to that place. The younger generation usually laughed at these stories, considering them mere tales to scare children. But no one, not even the bravest fishermen, dared to approach that part of the sea. Among the residents of Dornmouth was a man who, despite all the warnings, was not afraid to challenge the unknown. His name was Martin Cedric, and he was known for his persistence and thirst for discovery. Martin was a diver who had dedicated his life to exploring the ocean's depths. He didn't believe in legends and was convinced that all those stories about sea monsters and disappearances were just figments of the imagination. On one warm summer day, when the sun was flooding the sea with its light, Martin decided it was time to unravel the mystery of the doomed depths. He prepared his gear, took a couple of extra oxygen tanks, and set out on his boat to the canyon. The waves were calm, and he felt it was the perfect day for diving. Upon reaching the location, Martin stopped the boat and, after putting on his gear, jumped into the water. Underwater, there was silence, occasionally broken by the soft singing of sea creatures. Martin quickly reached the edge of the canyon, which stretched downward like a black abyss. His heart beat faster, not out of fear, but from the excitement of what he might find there. He began descending deeper, carefully examining the canyon walls. At first, everything seemed ordinary stone formations covered in algae and corals, with occasional fish darting by. But the further he descended, the darker the water around him became. The sun's rays no longer reached this depth, and Martin had to turn on his flashlight. At a depth of about 100 meters, he noticed something strange. The canyon walls were covered in strange symbols and drawings, unlike anything he had ever seen before. These symbols were ancient, looking as if they had been carved there many centuries ago. Martin stopped to examine them. It seemed to him that they depicted something alive, something enormous and terrifying. Going further down became increasingly difficult. The water around seemed denser, the oppressive darkness enveloped him, and Martin felt his heart tightening with the unknown. But he wasn't going to turn back. He descended several dozen more meters until he reached the bottom of the canyon. At the bottom, he saw something completely unexpected. Before him stood a huge underwater temple. Its walls were covered with the same symbols Martin had seen earlier, but now they looked even more menacing. The temple was partially destroyed, but it still retained its grandeur. Martin could not believe his eyes. This temple clearly could not have been built by ordinary people. Its size and architecture were beyond anything known. Suddenly, he felt a cold breeze, as if the darkness around him began to move. It seemed to him that unseen eyes were watching him from the depths of the temple. But instead of turning back, Martin moved closer. He knew that behind this temple lay the key to the mystery of the doomed depths. Upon entering, Martin found himself in a large hall, at the center of which was an altar. On the altar lay a huge stone artifact covered in unknown writings. Martin felt something ancient and powerful stirring within him, as if this artifact was the key to some knowledge hidden from humanity. But as soon as he reached for the artifact, the darkness around him came alive. Ghostly figures began to emerge from the temple walls, their shadows invisible in the light of his flashlight. They moved slowly, surrounding him. Martin realized that these were not just ghosts, but the souls of those who had once tried to solve the mystery of this place and perished in these depths. Each of these figures whispered something to him in an unknown language, but he could not understand their words. Martin felt his body weakening, as if life was being drained from him. He took a step back, but the figures continued to close in, filling all the space around him. Martin knew he needed to run, but his legs seemed to have grown roots. Inside him, a fear arose that he had never experienced before. Suddenly, his flashlight went out, and he found himself in complete darkness. Only the sounds of approaching footsteps and quiet whispers filled his consciousness. He tried to feel his way back but could not find the exit. The temple walls seemed to move, changing their position, confusing him even more. Martin understood that his time was running out, that his chances of survival were diminishing with each passing second. But then he remembered the artifact on the altar. Maybe it was his only chance. Gathering his last strength, he turned and headed back to the altar. The shadows continued to close in, but Martin, overcoming his fear, grabbed the artifact and lifted it above his head. For a moment, everything froze. Then the artifact began to glow with a bright blue light, illuminating the entire temple. The shadows seemed to retreat, frightened by this light, but soon began attacking even more fiercely. Martin felt his strength leaving him, as if the artifact was draining his life, demanding a sacrifice. But he knew that if he let go of the artifact, he would lose everything. Thoughts of his family flashed through his mind, about how he would never be able to return home if he didn't see this through to the end. Martin gathered all his willpower and focused on the artifact, hoping that he could subdue it. The artifact began to change, its form started to deform, and the light became brighter. The shadows screamed, their cries echoed throughout the temple. Martin felt a vortex forming around him, pulling everything in its path. The temple began to collapse, stones falling from the ceiling with a dull roar, but Martin did not let go of the artifact. At the last moment, when the vortex was about to consume him, the artifact exploded, scattering blinding light all around. The darkness around him disappeared, and he felt that he could breathe again. Before his eyes appeared something like a tunnel leading upward, to the surface. Martin didn't hesitate. He began to swim, desperately trying to reach the light at the end of the tunnel. His lungs burned, his strength was waning, but he kept moving. When his hands could no longer paddle, he felt something or someone pulling him out. He awoke on the shore, looking at the gray sky above him. His boat, fortunately, had not sunk and was floating nearby. He was alive, but what he had seen and experienced would stay with him forever. Martin knew that he had solved the mystery of the doomed depths, but was he ready for the consequences? Months passed, and Dornmouth returned to its peaceful life. But Martin could never be the same. He felt the darkness inside him growing, as if the artifact had passed on part of its curse to him. He became increasingly withdrawn, avoiding people and even his own family. One night, in the middle of the night, Martin woke up feeling something calling him from the depths. He realized that he could no longer fight this evil, and that his soul now belonged to those dark forces dwelling in the doomed depths. Martin left a note explaining to his family that he needed to return to where it all began. He took his gear and set out to sea once more, this time not to conquer the darkness but to become part of it. His boat was found a few days later, empty, rocking on the waves at the entrance to the canyon. There was no trace of Martin himself. But since then, rumors began circulating in Dornmouth that on nights when the sea becomes particularly dark, faint whispers can be heard from the depths, and a shadow resembling Martin sometimes appears on the shore, looking at the horizon. The town's residents once again started avoiding the doomed depths, understanding that sometimes it's better to leave ancient mysteries alone. But the knowledge of what lies beneath the water will never disappear. And who knows what will happen if someone dares to challenge this ancient evil again.